Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Beyond the Metrics, Strategies to Reverse CX Decline and Build Brand Loyalty. My name is Jeff King. I'm the mid-market sales leader here at Inflow, and I'll be your host for the session today. So before we jump in, I've got a couple housekeeping items to cover. First, our last webinar of the month is happening next Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific, where our team will be walking through the integrations of Salesforce with Genesys Cloud for enhanced CX. If that's something you're interested in and gaining some insight on, head over to our website and sign up today and secure your spot. Lastly, we've got a poll for our audience on how you'd rate your current state of organization's customer experience. So for one, do you feel as if it's improving, declining, or are you, like a lot of folks that we work with on a daily basis, are you not sure? Which is, totally okay too. It's anonymous, so we'll give you a couple seconds on that poll. But in the meantime, I'm going to kick it over to our first panelist to introduce himself, and that's Mike Doloff from InflowCX. Mike?
Hey everyone, glad to have you on. Glad to be part of the conversation today. I've been in the contact center technology, customer service space for about 15 years and love working in it. A lot of good changes going on right now, but definitely a lot of CX decline happening as well. So looking forward to talking to that. My perspective I'll bring that I think is well represented by what you see on the screen here of look at InflowCX, and I help lead sales here. We work with customers all the time on these initiatives around customer service, customer experience, with a real strong technology orientation to that. But that's not the only lens we look at things through, but that's certainly a primary one. But bring kind of an agnostic lens. We work with a lot of great partners. One of them being Brightmetrics and Peter have worked with for close to a decade now. I'll just say that we touch kind of these contact center customer service projects all the time, hundreds of them, and we're working in it day in and day out. So bringing the perspective of what are we seeing and hearing, what are some of the projects we're working on, that's the lens I'll be kind of speaking to today as we talk about our topic.
Thank you, Mike. Peter, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, definitely. Hey, everyone. Peter Hornberger. Gosh, in some ways, similar background to Mike's. I've been in this space for contact center space for about 15 years myself. Initially as a contact center implementer, doing similar things to what Inflow did, and for the last, almost decade at this point, doing contact center analytics, which is what my company Brightmetrics does. We are a data analytics product for contact center solutions. We work with Mitel, Genesys, RingCentral, and don't worry if you're not on one of those. I still have interesting things to tell you about data analytics, and who knows, maybe we'll integrate with your platform someday as well. But yeah, look, I am passionate about helping customers like yourselves figure out how to improve customer experience and agent productivity and operational efficiency through data. You ultimately can't manage what you can't measure, and so we're data experts. Our goal is to make it really easy to mine insights out of that to understand where you can dive in and inject change that will make meaningful results in those areas. So yeah, really excited to be here. Can't wait to dive into our topic together.
Awesome. Thank you, Peter. We're excited to have you here today. Along with my 20 years, looks like we're definitely all old and have been in the industry for a combined 60 plus years. So that does lend some credence to what we're going to be talking about today. We've seen the industry go from very highs to very lows, and then now it seems to have leveled off. And we're seeing some, like we said, we're seeing some decline in brand loyalty and some of those things. So our first question for the panel is, what are some of the common denominators that you guys are seeing driving this CX decline? Mike, I'd like you to lead off this question.
Some of this is not going to be shocking probably, but I would say a starting point of some of the bad CX that we see in the decline is just on bad fundamentals, right? Like meaning there's just not a customer service mindset or culture, even though that this is a part of the company that's serving in providing customer experience, right? It's not a part of kind of the lived values. It's not a part of the metrics. It's not a discussion, right? So the behaviors, the coaching, all of that's kind of misplaced. We see that happen frequently, which is a problem since this is the front door to a lot of businesses. Some of that's kind of misplaced KPIs too. I think there's been this struggle within a lot of contact centers around evolving their metrics to think beyond just sort of efficiency. Because efficiency might be great for customers if you can reduce, wait times and handle times because you're solving things efficiently. But oftentimes, if it's just efficiency for the sake of trying to reduce the cost of an interaction and the customer experience is not considered, or the employee experience, you're just churning through more things, you're going to have really kind of negative outcomes long term. So I think it is a lot of that's one aspect of that kind of fundamentals. I think there's a lot of bad journeys too, right? Like our customer experiences for any organization have evolved. Probably our customers of how they interact, the life cycle of them with us has probably changed over the years. A lot of processes and the technology and the knowledge around that hasn't. Like people haven't looked holistically at like what's going on, what's my customer doing in these different touch points across their life cycle with us. And so there's just a lot of disparate data in disjointed tech being used and process and workflow gaps. And some of that I think was accelerated further by the pandemic, changing a lot of things like that rapidly. And no one had the time or resources, or at this point has taken the time to go in and look at that journey and say like, okay, what do we need to fix here? And then the last thing, I think I'm in tech, right? But I think tech is part of the problem a lot of times because I think people in the tech world promises this like quick solve to things. Like it's just a tech solve, right? Like let's just throw tech at it. And so people are constantly chasing these like shiny objects and quick fixes of things. And sometimes you're layering like a good piece of technology onto bad data or bad processes or bad internal understanding of how to use it or bad expectations, and then like tech's blamed, right? And people are like, oh, I'm spending money on this not working. It's because that foundation you're putting on top of is not solid. So those are some of the areas that kind of, I know that's high level, but those are some of the themes that I think run through a lot of the decline in CX we see.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Peter, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, gosh. I mean, Mike, I think you hit the nail on the head on a lot of it. I'll just kind of drill in a little deeper in a couple of those areas. I totally agree with you about bad journeys. To drill into one aspect of that, I think that in a lot of ways, contact centers are creating disjointed multi-channel experiences, and there's a certain degree to which this is an old problem. One of the most common complaints that if you go talk to an average person on the street who doesn't work in our industry and say, hey, can you tell me about the last bad experience you had with a contact center? For years, one of the things they'll tell you is like, oh, I talked to someone, they transferred me to someone else, and that person knew nothing about me. That's in the old voice to voice. But now we've got these things starting with, a text chat or an AI bot, and then moving to maybe an email or some other channel. And a lot of times these are disparate pieces of technology that are not communicating and passing information across one another. And so it's an old problem in a new way. And that just creates the same nightmare that people have been complaining about us for ages. And it goes back to what Mike, you were saying of like, look, ultimately throwing new technology on top of bad fundamentals still equals a bad output. And speaking of new technology, look, there is no doubt that in the CX space, we are going through a transformational shift right now. AI is here and it's here to stay, and it is driving uh, massive change within our industry. Um, but I think a lot of people are doing AI for AI's sake without stepping back and looking at the broader picture and understanding where does this fit in? How can this augment what I'm doing? And how can I actually succeed with this? I was at a conference, and not a conference related to contact center, but they were talking about AI and this idea of perceived versus actual benefit in AI. And it was specifically looking at startups that are bringing in AI and asking them, hey, what's the perceived benefit? What percentage better do you think that you are versus their actual growth trajectory? And there was a wide imbalance between that. The perceived benefit was significantly higher than the actual output. And I think we're seeing a lot of that just in AI in general, but I think we see that in contact center too, where it is, to Mike's language, a shiny object that's exciting, but there's not a lot of strategic thought that's going into it, and it's actually helping to perpetuate bad experiences rather than drive forward new, the promise that it has for us. And I think it absolutely will achieve that in the long run. we have to be strategic how we do it. I was sitting on a Forrester webinar, gosh, at the beginning of this year, and they said that a third of contact centers will launch bad AI experiences this year. That's a lot of us, candidly. And so I think that's just an area where we need to, where we're seeing a lot of degradation of CX quality. And then look, the other two things I would highlight in here is just constrained budgets. We all know budgets are tight. The economy is not what it once was. And so, there is a challenge of how do we do this stuff well without as much resources we used to have. And then the other one that I think is just I don't know, maybe more of a silent killer in the space is agent turnover. Agent turnover is really high in contact centers, and I think that continual turnover not only drops efficiency, but it also causes a decline in CX quality. Ultimately, if you're constantly cycling through agents, you are not building up a base of people that know how to serve your customers well. And so agent turnover is an area that we oftentimes think about more in the operational efficiency side, but has a massive impact on CX quality as well.
No, great. Thank you both. It seems as though there isn't one thing just flooding everybody, and that it's either a combination of or just a few little changes that could be made. And one of the things that we talk about all the time are, well, what's bucking the trends? What are some of the companies doing to help buck these trends? Because they are universal throughout the contact center customers that we work with and try to help on a daily basis. So like you said, AI, that could go either way. It sounds great and it does help in a lot of circumstances, but as Mike mentioned, it could just be one of those shiny objects that they're just throwing at it to see if it works as a quick fix. And a lot of times without a strategy behind it, it's not going to do everything that it's always it's always said it's going to do. Deflection to digital paths. That's one that's been going on now for a few years, and it worked great for a while. But now customers are more savvy. They understand how to get around the bots. They're not working them the same way. But one of the ones that comes up quite often is that whole company culture and the mentality. Is the company change oriented? Are they going to be able to accept these changes? Are they going to be forced on them, or are they brought in as this is going to help you do your job better? So not only does the contact center affect the customers and their prospects, but it really affects their employees and what that mindset's like. So I'd really like you guys to touch on, what are some of the companies doing to help buck these trends that we brought up earlier? Peter, I'd like you to lead out on this question, if you would, please.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Look, on one hand, the easy answer to this is not the stuff we just talked about, but to drill a little bit more into the kind of the practical side of that. Look, integrating your channels in such a way that information doesn't have to be repeated by an end user as they're kind of moving through those channels is really important. If you don't know how to do that, I mean, look, shameless plug, the Inflow team does. Go talk to them. They'll help you figure that stuff out. When it comes to AI, look, I think there's no doubt you can't bury your head under a rock and ignore AI. It's coming for us all. It's really important. And the contact center leaders of the future are not going to be replaced by AI, but they are going to be replaced by the leaders that know how to use AI really well. And so when it comes to AI, tinker, test it, play around with it for sure. But before you start throwing that stuff in, I think it's really important to define what's the objective, what are you trying to get out of this, how do we measure it, and fail really fast with that stuff. Put that stuff in, and if it's not working, have a plan so that you can understand that within a week or two and pull the plug on that. So I think more than anything, just with AI, fail as fast as you possibly can in that, and try different things. And look, if you're on the outside looking in and not sure how to implement AI, the organizations that I work with that I've seen most successful with this is starting with agent assist tools. Don't worry about getting AI replacing a low-level agent or handling front-end interactions. Keep that with your agents. Figure out how you can use AI to assist your agents. There are fantastic agent assist tools out there. We could do a whole webinar on that stuff, but that's a great place to start. And then from there, measure, monitor, learn. And then eventually that may lead into actually using AI to handle some of those frontline interactions. And then the other thing that I've been spending a lot of time thinking about lately is emotional intelligence training. Look, I think you don't have to go far on the internet to recognize that empathy has eroded in a lot of ways over the last 4 years. And look, we could spend a long time waxing philosophical about why that is. COVID, isolation, remote work. We're no longer sitting, many of us, around a water cooler reading other people's facial expressions. We're not engaging face to face, but a lot of the workforce that's sitting in contact center are young 20-year-olds whose entire life is, digital and based on their phone. And there's a certain degree to which empathy erodes when that's your reality. And so I think that really successful contact centers are driving emotional intelligence training programs where they teach their teams how to actually engage with a person in the way that they want to be met. Look, I run sales and customer success here in our support team. One of the things that I constantly harp on with them is what's the question behind the question? When someone sends in a question to us, it's usually something about like, hey, can I build this report? Sometimes the answer is yes, and we teach them how to do that. Sometimes the answer is no. But if the answer is no, the thing I want my agents thinking about is what are they actually trying to accomplish with this? What's the end goal? Why do they need this report? Because, yeah, we might not be able to do it the way that they've envisioned, but we might have seven other ways that they can actually achieve the same thing. That's emotional intelligence training, teaching your team how to actually understand the human on the other side of this interaction and drive that. And so I think that that's a really big growth edge for contact centers at large, is figuring out how to make your teams more empathetic.
No, that's good, and that leads us right to answering that question of how do you buck trends, and those are really solid trends that need to be addressed internally, not externally, but that's all internal. I really appreciate that. Mike, what are your thoughts?
I think I'll touch on the AI piece first, just a moment with what Peter said. I think some of what we're seeing success with is look, the same problems that have plagued or the same challenges, right? Of how do we get more efficient in the contact center, maintain costs, but also if some contact centers are revenue creators as well. AI does have potential, and we've seen some customers, right, thoughtfully do this. To Peter's point on this, often it is like an agent assist type of capability. That's an easier place to start, right? What are the generative AI capabilities to improve our agents' efficiencies and performance in an interaction or summarization of a interaction? So we got clean notes, or maybe it's analyzing all these interactions and giving us insights into customer sentiment and what are customers really calling about so we can prioritize other priorities of fixing in this journey. There is a lot of like, that's an area where people are bucking the trend is some of that. Because then you're getting these gains and improvements. They aren't just efficiencies. They're improving the customer experience. They're finding problems and gaps in the employee knowledge so you can better enable your agents so they're not frustrated. All these kinds of things kind of compound. Outside of that, though, like honestly, one of the biggest things I don't think it's talked about enough is in contact centers now, what we see is there's a lot of stakeholders, right? And there's needs to be good alignment between the technical team, technical stakeholders, and the business stakeholders. Get them aligned, right, to get consensus and work on some of these more complicated things. Because most of these problems aren't just a contact center problem. I often cite an example of a customer of ours that the contact center was struggling with average handle time and all these kind of core metrics. They're struggling, they're slipping. So we jumped in and helped them analyze what's going on. The problem actually was a workflow problem in part of their shipping. They're an e-commerce company, and it was driving all of this interaction to the contact center. Now, agents were tagging them correctly, right? So there's a knowledge thing, but at the end of the day, the problem needed to be solved across different departments. That's often the case with these CS and CX initiatives. They're more complicated than just within that team. Having good alignment across companies, having good stakeholder engagement, that's a key piece. That's the tactical piece, but also at a company level, if you're really going to move the needle here on CX, you have to have a good plan and a strategy. There has to be buy-in across the company. This has to be something that doesn't just get talked about in the contact center. Yeah, it might be one of the groups that's really leading that charge in collaboration with IT and others, but like this needs to be something that's talked about at the executive level, board level too, of like, we're on this journey and this is why it's important. We have this change oriented mindset that we're driving throughout the company. So, because change management, Yeah, if the executive team says it's all great, we need to do this, nobody communicates that or gets the frontline employees on board, it's going to fail pretty quickly, or just not get the traction you want. So getting that mindset, getting a plan and a strategy, ownership of that, and then that change-oriented mindset driven through the company, and that's a topic in and of itself. Those are things that these companies that are bucking this trend are doing really well.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. Those are all fantastic points. I mean, we talked about, why this is going to be an issue, but we really want to know why it's important to these businesses. I mean, my teams are technology evaluation teams, and our solutions engineers run into this quite often. And we have customers that will come to us and say they need to make a change for one reason or another. And we ask them how it's going today. And they all say, well, it's good. It could be better, but it's going well. And we're like, okay, great. What are your interactions like? And they tell us. And again, a lot of times these are from upper leadership. So we go to their websites, we go and chat in, we go and try to find and call in and try to find what it's like, what an experience is like for their customers. And we report back to them. And it's surprising the answers that we get versus what they think it is. So I appreciate you guys wanting to know and put that in front of them. And a lot of what Inflow does and Brightmetrics does is help give them the tools to really understand what's happening in their world. So let's talk about that a little bit. Why is this important to their business? I mean, I understand it's driving competition, a lot of things like that, but Mike, could you lead out on that? Why it would be important to their business today?
We touched on some of them, but yeah, this is like an imperative, right? Meaning like I think if a lot of companies don't figure this out, this has massive top and bottom line impacts to these businesses because there's a couple things. One is a lot of times the customer service or the contact center is a front door to a lot of brands, right? Like that's a lot of where the impressions of a company are made. And so if those are always negative, that's going to certainly have an impact, right? Especially if you've got options, if you're one of many in competition, right, for that customer's services or products. But it also drives the employee experience, right? So if employees are frustrated because they're lacking tools or knowledge or training, and they're getting customers who are constantly really irate because there's other problems in this journey, you're going to have agent turnover that Peter mentioned. You're going to have dissatisfaction there, which has a huge impact, right? The cost of like training and rehiring is massive for any organization in any role. And in contact center, this is a huge problem. And at the end of the day, that kind of employee experience, customer experience, and revenue are all very closely linked. So you should care because you're in business and you're an organization that has a P&L. That's why it's important at its fundamental. But I would say the other thing is in general, right? There's a lot of commoditization of offerings. There's a lot of competition, right? A lot of things have been turned on their head, right? Like the democratization of tech makes it so that a small startup can have the same kind of capabilities, right? And offering as maybe a really established Fortune 100 company. While that's powerful, um, that means there's a real pressure, though, on providing sustained, really good customer service to differentiate. Because it's going to be like you might spend years building something that seems so cool, and then there's immediately five competitors who do something similar. And if you've just focused on the product and you haven't focused on service, people are going to come along and make the widget a little better, make this a little faster, make whatever. Differentiating on good customer service is really hard to do. If you can do it, that is really one of the big things that differentiates you in the market. That is the thing that we have customers that this is exactly a lot of customers, right? Because they're focused on this because it's hard to focus in these other areas. Yeah, they're going to be try to be good and they're going to invest in R&D and da da da. At the end of the day, though, if they can execute really well on these complex customer journeys that exist because of the
Yeah,
business they're in, they will be head and shoulders above most others because they just don't put the time in. It's hard to do. It's very unsexy work. It requires a lot of collaboration. It requires a lot of, internal thought and getting the right partners in the door and making investments. And honestly, if you can do that and have the kind of, it's like, it's a marathon, it's this long journey. If you can do that, you will be better than most out there. That's the truth of it. And that's why it matters is you can differentiate your brand. That's why.
agreed. Agreed. Thank you. Peter, your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I totally agree. I think I would just sum up my answer to this question is brand loyalty is why it matters. For all the reasons that Mike mentioned, it increases revenue, it increases retention, it's a competitive advantage. I think probably my Favorite example of this week, my favorite example changes constantly, but is the brand US Cellular. Look, we all know Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T, but US Cellular is this other kind of fourth wing that I don't know that they would say this necessarily. US Cellular, if you're listening, I'm a fan. I think you guys are great. But a lot of times I see them as the recommended player for old people because they have great customer support. And what old people want when it comes to cell service is great customer support. That's a form of niche brand loyalty that is really, really hard for the other big box providers to compete with ultimately. And that's what all of this is about. I mean, how do you wind up as I had a friend that sent me a survey the other week for like Christmas gifts of like, what do you like? What are the scents you like? What are your favorite brands? Like, think about this in that way. How do you wind up as the brand that's on that list? Now, look, some of us are in B2B sales and we're probably not going to wind up on anyone's Christmas list, and that's okay. But you get the spirit of the question. For those of you in retail, you're lucky. You can enact change to wind up on that list. Look, I think there's two studies that I read this year that I've kind of held on to in pairs. One is an example of the negative side of this, and one is an example of the positive side. The American Express Customer Service Barometer did a study where they found that 33% of Americans say they'll consider switching companies after just a single instance of poor service. So that's on the negative side. Bad service is going to affect brand loyalty and retention and so forth. On the positive side, though, Salesforce said, look, 78% of customers will do business with a brand again after a mistake is made if the customer service is excellent. So a lot of times you're not responsible for the frustration with which someone is reaching out to you. In the contact center, a lot of times someone's reaching out to you because a mistake that was made that was outside of your control. But if you're excellent, you significantly increase or you significantly minimize the damage that that mistake that was outside of your control has on that particular customer. So look, ultimately, brand loyalty matters a ton in our world today, and contact centers are such a huge part of driving that loyalty.
So build brand loyalty equity by doing good things, because that will offset the stumbles that come along, right?
Totally, absolutely.
That's good lead into our last question, which is we've got about 4 minutes left, so about 2 minutes for each of you gentlemen. What are some of the things the audience can do to get started? And I think we kind of led right into that, but Mike, can you lead off on this one real quick, please?
Yeah, I'd say two things really quickly. One is talk to frontline staff and observe their behavior, right? They know often, and they have workarounds, right? They're working around a lot of these disconnected systems and gaps and challenges. And observe. We get to observe a lot of frontline staff, and you learn a ton, right? Because you might think, oh, I think it works like this, or this is how we've trained people to work, and it doesn't work that way in practice, right? Observe a lot because they know what's going on. At the end of the day, too, it signals this matters, right? This matters, and you are important in this organization. That's the first one. The second one, you have a lot of data at your fingertips that's not tapped into. You have tons of call recordings, probably, and other kind of digital interactions with customers. They're sharing tons of, your customers are sharing lots of insights today. Dig into those. You're going to find where are agent training opportunities, where are there process gaps, what are the customers saying, what are they feeling, and ultimately, you're not going to have to do that with yet another thing, right? Of like, oh, I need to like do a post-call survey, or I need to do this. Like that's data that exists that can be mined. This is a great use case where AI and generative AI can scrape and assess and give you insights into what's going on. Very low cost, very high return on the impact that can bring. Because we see a lot of customers that think that they need to go left because of this is the initiative, and you listen to and understand what's really happening, and they need to go right. And it's very clear. So there's a lot of that data that's right there you need to tap into. So analyze the interaction data. Those are the two that I would say like are very low effort that can yield a lot of insights of where to focus time. Where do you have the biggest problems you can impact?
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, sure. Look, real quick, I mean that leads into look, my entire world. I'm a data guy, so my answer is going to be data. Look, I think a lot of times we think about CX quality and we measure it using lagging indicators, CSAT, NPS, your turnover rate. Those are all lagging indicators that take a very long time to shift trends around. Become an expert at leading indicators. In CX, things like transfer rate, abandon rate, wait times. Those things are old school metrics that we've all been looking at for ages and tell such a rich story about what probably is going to come out in those lagging indicators. And they matter arguably more now with the introduction of AI. I'll leave that as a little, nugget. Come talk to me if you want to hear more of my thoughts on that. Agent satisfaction, occupancy, handle times, adherence, exception frequency, sick time. When are they doing things that they're not being asked to do? Those are what I call green events, opportunities to pat them on the back. The more that you see, the more likely you have really rock star agents and satisfied agents on your team. And then lastly, productivity, handle time versus transfer rate, rapid disposition codes. Look for opportunities to train your team to be even better than they are right now. So learn your leading indicators and how to use them. Don't wait for CSAT or NPS to tell you that you've done a good job. Figure out how to measure those things up front.
No, it's a good point. Working through the data all along versus waiting to see how it comes out is one of the things that we speak to frequently, and Brightmetrics does it better than anybody. So thank you so much. Kali, could you pull up Peter's contact information?
And as this is coming up, look, I'll say, hey, you're welcome to email me or give me a call anytime you have questions. Inflow team, huge thanks to you guys for having me on. We appreciate the long running partnership and love working together. It was a ton of fun. Mike, Jeff, thanks for chatting with me today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining. If you're looking for more help on getting started or want more information on what we discussed today, please get in touch. Peter's information was there. It will be included in our recording. We have a team of experts ready to go and help you on that CX transformation journey. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining today, and thank you to our audience for taking some time out of your day to be with us. We hope you enjoyed today's session and see you on the next one. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.